Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss President Macron's speech to the UK Parliament yesterday as he warned about the different threats posed to Europe from both China and the USA. The French president was warning of nothing less than an assault on democracy. Is Macron showing how Europe can become stronger? And will other leaders heed him if so? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So, President Macron was addressing Parliament yesterday on the first state visit for the French Premier in Britain since before Brexit. In fact, since the last Labour government, if we're being pedantic. Which sort of makes me wonder if, even if he's right about what he says, whether Europe collectively will act on it. But Macron is the first foreign leader also to receive a full state visit since Labour took power, which may be pure coincidence, but does help underline the importance of our relationship with Europe rather than our usual default position of prioritising the United States. Trump will be getting his state visit later on. We've not done ourselves any favours in recent years with this sort of traditional approach. And Macron was talking about nothing less than the choice Europe faces to be a bit player, buffeted by the USA and China, or to become strong collectively. To, as he puts it, reduce excessive dual dependencies on the US and China. The word excessive is important there because obviously we can't not trade with you. Like if the USA's been awkward or China's been awkward, we can't say, well, we're just not going to trade with you. There are some countries we can say that. We can sort of do that with Russia. We can sort of do that with some other countries. Not really the USA or China. So this is a focus on avoiding excessive dependency. So what did he think were the specific problems? Well, although Macron said that we work in partnership with both, with China on climate change, and the implication I think was on defence with the USA, even though that is in question now, surely. But China's threat he saw in terms of trade, first of all, their massive state aid subsidies, which allow Chinese companies to trade competitively, even with markets around the world, Macron said, destabilised the value chain. Now, in this, Europe's got very much the same problem the United States has. We're just not approaching it in quite such the clumsy way Trump is. See, it's one thing for markets such as China to produce goods with cheaper labour. As China builds up its economy, I mean, arguably that becomes a bit more difficult anyway, as they expect higher standards of living. But as China has been doing this, North America and Europe just increased focus on higher value goods and particularly services. And you know what? American companies just shifted some production to, China and surrounding countries anyway. In fact, even manufacturing in the West, where it takes place in the West, still benefited from some of the cheaper materials and components in the production of higher value goods. But if China are able to improve the competitiveness of some of their goods beyond just cheaper production, that gives them a huge advantage. And the worry for Macron is that we become dependent. With Trump's trade war against the world, we're already learning that dependence on the United States is a bit of a problem. Canada, for example, has already allowed itself to back down on the digital services tax. Sounds like the EU may do as well, and the UK will be next. In fact, we've already shown signs of watering it down a little bit if necessary. We certainly can't stand up to Trump on an issue which even the EU finds easier to give ground on. To me, the thrust of Macron's speech was a warning that we're at a bit of a crossroads here. Although Trump had to back down from the clumsier tools he's deployed in his trade war with China, nonetheless, that trade war is in full flow now. Whereas in the past, the US and China would sort of carve out their own niches, now Trump wants to compete openly with China directly on pretty much everything as far as I can tell. If Europe doesn't provide a third pole in this multipolar trade world, we're going to be stuck having to choose between advanced tech from one or other of these two markets. Will we want to buy Chinese EVs and other smart tech if there are worries that the sensors could be relaying information to the Chinese government? But we'd also have the same fears of US tech as well. And Macron said that the US was also a threat to trade, as it had decided to no longer be compliant with World Trade Organization rules. Which is a point. See, ahead of the visit, a little segue, Nigel Farage was apparently put out that Macron wouldn't be seeing him. He'd be meeting Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey, but not him. He was like, what's going on? I'm the leader of the opposition. No, mate, you're not. Like, in some ways, yes, you can argue that he is the leader of the opposition, but that's because other parties are allowing him to do so, particularly Labour and the Conservatives. But formally, he's got absolutely no role in Parliament. He's just an MP. He's an MP. Badenoch and Davey both occupy positions which give them more influence. They can set agendas in Parliament, not as much as the government, but they can. Farage can't. He's literally just an MP. But also, bringing him into it. So, has anyone asked him about Trump dismissing the World Trade Organization? See, during the Brexit years, he was all about WTO rules. Oh, they're marvellous, absolutely marvellous, brilliant. That's what we should do. Yeah, WTO rules for the win. Trump doesn't think so. Is Farage at odds with his orange daddy here? Or has he changed his mind? Again. Mind you, what seems to have interested a lot of people about Macron's speech when talking about the dual trade threats was when he then said this: if we want to build a sustainable future for our children, we must de-risk our economies and societies from these dual dependencies. Economies and societies. So going beyond trade here, the threat is not just trade dependency. Our societies are threatened as well. Now, I could talk about the way both the US and China have been clearly working hard to influence politics directly in the UK as well as around Europe. For example, the current anti-trans rhetoric has been remorselessly promoted by far-right American groups, even in Europe. As we can see with what they're doing in America now, their real aim is to take away women's rights in general. They've begun with attacks on trans rights as the gateway drug, and it's working. But Macron's focus was on social media from the USA. Manipulative algorithms, he said, were pushing political misinformation sourced from Russia. The EU, of course, is tightening up social media regulation, much to Trump's annoyance. In theory, so are the UK. We've said we need to review the Online Safety Act because it doesn't have enough provision. So in theory, we are as well. However, the way the review's going, I don't think anyone's confident that we're going to be seeing much more protections against social media abuses coming into law whilst we're trying to keep the Orange Mafia Don on side. So we may have to wait a few years. Macron really laid it on thick about the risk to democracy in Europe, though, from foreign interference. We certainly know about that in the UK, those of us who've been paying attention anyway. But the question here is not just about whether the UK heeds these words, but whether they are seized upon in the EU as well. He's not going to be French president by the end of either Trump's term or our current parliament. He will be replaced by someone else. Who will that be? What will their worldview be? That's not clear. France itself is at much risk of ending up with a pro-Putin government as the UK in the future. And France's risk is more short-term. Right now, there are signs that the UK is taking more serious action against foreign interference from Russia and China. Not so much the USA. The EU doing likewise, though with resistance from some members. But what happens if France, one of the big driving forces of everything in the EU, suddenly goes soft on these issues after the next election? Because if we look at what the EU are doing at the moment, remember, always France and Germany are big driving forces of that. If France suddenly goes soft, the EU may no longer be pushing some of these things as hard. So perhaps his speech was as much to France and wider Europe as it was to British parliamentarians, who nonetheless enjoyed his more positive moments on closer cooperation, especially on the youth mobility scheme. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.